Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to our second recorded lecture. Today, the lecture is actually broken up into two different videos. So we have this section, which is the first section. I'm going to keep it relatively short because in the second section, I'm going to do a complete demo of the Land PKS app for everyone. So I've recorded that as a separate video, but is really a video of my phone screen as far as walking through the app. So this section is going to be more of just a short introduction to the topic of conservation technologies, which we've already touched on somewhat in the citizen science section, but we'll talk about a bit more today. So let me share my screen. All right, so conservation technologies. There were two readings for today, both were relatively short. So this is what we're going to do. Reminders. I'm going to introduce assignment 3, which is due later this month. We'll do a short overview of conservation technology, a very brief introduction to soil conservation and the Land PKS app. And then the Land PKS demo will be part 2 or the second video. So just some reminders. For Monday's lecture, I think about 20 or so of you have done this, but make sure you go onto Blackboard, go to the discussion section and click on the participation for the day. Like I said, just a handful of questions for you to answer, create your own thread and answer those questions. So the same thing, we'll do this for every single class, just as a way to get you that participation and attendance credit, which is a little bit tough to do over a recorded lecture, and also just to get you thinking a little bit extra about the lectures and the readings. And I'm going to keep, like I said, I think on Monday, I'm going to keep these lectures generally shorter than the hour 15, so you do have some extra time to do this. And then assignment 3, which I'm going to go over, is due on April 20th, and assignment 2 is actually due today. So make sure you get that in if you haven't already. So assignment 3, all of this text is in your syllabus. This hasn't changed at all. Move my picture out of the way, but this is the environmental policy analysis. So the last kind of third of the class will be focusing a bit more on the policy side. So starting next week, we're going to talk about the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, a few other things that are a bit more policy focused. So this is why this assignment goes along with that. So for this assignment, you'll select one recent California law and examine the strengths and weaknesses in this law. So just some questions that you should answer during your write-up. Obviously, you should name the law that you're talking about, name the policy. What controls does the law provide? What is not covered or not covered sufficiently by these laws? Is this policy achieving its goal? And then obviously connecting the science and the policy parts of this course, what scientific information is the law based on, if any? What improvements do you suggest in the wording or implementation of this policy? And do you agree with this new policy? Why or why not? This is obviously in addition to providing at the beginning, it'd be good to provide a short summary of what that law is. So this is similar to the assignment due today, 2 pages, single spaced, due on Blackboard, just like all our other assignments. So I have posted a few options here. If these are different conservation, environmental focused laws, so you're more than welcome to use any 3 of these. If you do find something else that you'd like to write about instead, please go ahead and do that. The website that I have for all 3 of these, you can see they kind of come from the same-ish place where a lot of these laws are listed. You can go there, poke around. If you see something else that I guess interests you more, go for it. But these 3 examples I have here cover some different things. So the single-use plastic straws, obviously you've probably noticed, not recently, but you know, several months ago, going to a restaurant, you were often served paper straws instead of plastic straws. The second law is high occupancy vehicle lanes, HOV lanes. So that's not only for folks who are carpooling, but also for folks who have alternative fuel vehicles are allowed to use those lanes as well. And then the last one is California Renewables Policy Standard Program. So this is about emissions of greenhouse gases and renewable energy. California, as you probably know, actually often leads the country as far as a lot of these environmental policies and regulations. So this is a really interesting opportunity to see what California is doing and kind of think a little bit more deeply about, what are the strengths and weaknesses of these different laws, is what scientific evidence supports them, and give your opinion. So like I said, it should be about 2 pages, single-spaced. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me about this. Or as always, you can join me on Zoom for office hours on Mondays. So that's assignment 3. Like I said, this is word for word up on Blackboard and in the syllabus. Okay, so for today, the learning objectives, we're just going to kind of briefly go over some of the conservation technology tools that were in the readings. A lot of this stuff is probably not new to you. So we're going to kind of just touch on that and then touch on soil conservation and soils, because we're going to spend the second part of this lecture is about the Land PKS app, or the Land Potential Knowledge System app, which I worked on for 2 years. So I know this very well. So we're definitely going to focus on apps, which I know you've already done some of as far as assignment 2. And it's really emphasizing apps, I guess, because it's something that's, that's something that you can do. It's something that you can download on your smartphone, something that doesn't require, thousands of dollars to buy a fancy piece of equipment. It doesn't require a lot of technical expertise a lot of the time. So that's why for citizen science and for technology, we're going to focus on apps a bit. That's also my own area of expertise. That's the conservation technology that I've worked on significantly more than any other. So we're going to focus on that. So from the parliamentary reading, they have 10 different conservation innovations. This thing is a little bit out of date. It's for 2017. I tried to find if there were any lists for 2019 maybe, and I couldn't find anything. And a lot of these are not necessarily old technologies. A lot of them are improvements on new technologies. So the first one is camera traps. Those are obviously something that have been around for a long time, but the technology as far as, the size of the camera traps, these traps are usually something that's triggered by motion, and all those kind of technologies have really advanced quite a bit. So camera traps are still used a lot to understand what species are where and wildlife movement particularly. Number 2, which I think is growing quite a bit, is automated bioacoustics monitoring devices. So this is basically just trying to capture the noise that's going on from wildlife or just the nature's noise. There's one project I was listening to a podcast about a while ago, and they were putting cell phones up in trees, and they could hear if there were any illegal logging going on because, could hear the logging in the background. So it's a way for them to monitor deforestation. I think this was in Papua New Guinea. So there's a lot of examples of that. This technology obviously is coming a long way as well with the, increased technology of cell phones, battery life, things like that. So this camera traps and bioacoustic monitoring is fairly similar. One just takes pictures and one takes sound. So number 3, so analyzing genetic data. Genetic research has actually come a long way in the last few years. I mean, this is one way that, conservationists can track maybe where wildlife species came from, who's related to who. Another example, it's being used to kind of identify where rhino horns and where elephant tusks are coming from, if they're been poached recently or if they're legal. So that's another way that it's used as far as tracking some of these kind of frowned upon items, I guess. Detection dogs. So obviously dogs have been used to track for hundreds of years, But this is a little bit more than just using dogs for hunting. This is using dogs to track down different target species that you're trying to track, trying to locate, understand their movement and behavior. So training dogs to do conservation work, basically. Generating and accessing big data. So a lot of the mobile apps and the examples of citizen science are part of this. So getting just massive amounts of data through things like iNaturalist and eBird, these kind of technologies wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. And accessing these kind of big data sets can help you then, as eBird was doing, monitor where bird species are and how they're moving and what their population numbers look like. So under the category of monitoring, they have these two things. So aerial imagery. We had one example of community-based conservation that was doing this using drones. So the advent of drones and kind of the cost effectiveness of drones these days are really making it quite easy to take aerial imagery, which as they were using in that video we watched a few weeks ago now, they're using it to monitor, deforestation, to monitor where illegal squatters might be within the forest. Number 7 is then kind of combining this remote sensing data with other types of data. So the examples they listed in this article was satellite tracked fishing vessels and tag shark locations. So you could match remote sensing images with these tagged locations of certain species. Or you can match camera trap photos kind of with aerial imagery. There's a lot of different ways you can combine these different types of data, and with the computing power that we have these days, it becomes more and more easy to do so. And the third category that they have here is ways to enlist broad audiences in taking action. So this is what we talked about as far as citizen science. And it's kind of neat to see that both the articles for today did talk about citizen science as a new kind of innovation in conservation, mostly through apps, on online and mobile data sharing, crowdsourcing data collection. I think all three of these they have here kind of can go together depending on the project. But that's something that is definitely gaining a lot of popularity and a lot of ground in the last few years. So the second article by Miller, this was from 2016, so about the same time, and they actually list a lot of the same innovations. Drones are on here, camera traps, bioacoustics. They do talk about AI and machine learning, which I wish I understood more what that was. But basically using, computer algorithms and things to make real-time predictions using data about what animals might be where, the rate of deforestation, things like that. And then they have live camera feeds. So some of you might have seen, for example, zoos will often have live camera feeds of a certain animal, or particularly if an animal is pregnant and planning, they're expecting it to go into labor soon. This also is true of wild animals. Will often be live camera feeds of, say, a bald eagle's nest or something like that, where you could actually watch these animals in the wild. So it'd be a good thing, if you have some extra time on your hands being quarantined, a good thing to look up what different live camera feeds you can find of wildlife. In the second half of their list, a few of the same things. So some of the DNA analysis and citizen science, improved wildlife tracking. So, biologists have used wildlife tracking and tags for a long time, but with, as technology advances, these tags are getting smaller, the batteries are getting smaller, and the batteries are lasting longer. So all of that makes it easier to track more animals and different types of species. And then the example they give, number 6, an encyclopedia of ecosystems. This is basically computer modeling to determine what the natural habitat was in an area before humans were there, which is something that we honestly don't know in a lot of places, especially in population centers, particularly on the East Coast, where there's been people living there for hundreds of years in, not just a handful of folks, but actually like established cities and things like that, where the natural ecosystems have been significantly altered for hundreds of years. This is a way to look at, based on the data that's available, what would the natural habitat look like before human disturbance, which is good to know if you're trying to kind of use that as a baseline for conservation. And then number 8, they have mapping forests with lasers. So they use a LiDAR flying over the forest and beaming down pulses of light, which is definitely a new way to actually map out forests. And I would just say that a lot of these innovations that were named really fit well, I guess, with some of the skills you might learn for those of you who are geography majors. This is a geography course. And one thing that our department is really strong at is some of these technologies like drones and remote sensing and GIS and aerial imagery. So that'd be one kind of, I guess, pitch I would make for why you can major in geography and be an effective conservationist. You don't just have to major in biology or something like that. Geography can provide you a really solid actual skill set of things that you can do to help conserve natural resources. All right, so I'm going to start to dive in to the Land Potential Knowledge System Project, or Land PKS. So as I may have mentioned before, I worked as their global coordinator for 2 years, basically before joining the faculty here at SDSU this past fall. And as global coordinator, I was coordinating a lot of things and in charge of a lot of things. I worked closely with soil scientists, I worked closely with rangeland managers, I worked closely with land use planners, shared an office with our software programmer, so I learned not actually how to program, but I learned how to talk to him and use some of that programming language. And one of the main things that I did was also education and outreach. So these 3 pictures are all different trainings that I did throughout these 2 years. The one on the left with me and the gentleman surrounding, looking at the phone, that was a training that we did in rural Tanzania. These gentlemen are, they're just villagers from this village that we were in, to be honest, and I'm showing them how to use our app on my phone. The middle village here, or the middle picture here, sorry, this is from Ethiopia. This is a training that we did at a kind of local government office. And the different people we had in the room were kind of an assortment of folks who did land use planning, natural resources, forestry. A lot of them were environmental jobs in that district. So we did, this is kind of the indoor portion of the training where we're giving a brief overview of the app, and then we would go outside, obviously. And then on the right, this is a training that we did in New Mexico, mostly with rangeland managers. So here we're digging our hole to collect the soil samples of Land PKS. So Land PKS is, while it was originally designed for use in Africa, it's actually being used quite a bit in the United States as well. So what is Land PKS? As I explained a little bit last time, it's basically a system. It's a mobile app that's available for both Android and iPhone that helps people collect, interpret, and store data. So it fits under citizen science, where you have, not necessarily trained professionals, but you have folks going out and collecting their own data. And this fits under the category 2 of citizen science, where yes, you're collecting data that goes to our portal that can be aggregated and used by scientists, but the main motivation for collecting data is to help inform your own land management decisions and to make sure, help to inform you in making more sustainable decisions on your land. There's the website, landpotential.org. And I'm gonna, we'll go through a lot of detail for this. I'm not gonna cover too much right now. The different modules that we have. So the app is broken up into different modules. We're gonna cover today mostly the land info module, because that's the soils-based one. But feel free to download and play around with any of this. Land management is for farm record keeping. Soil health is also a soils-based one. And then land cover is about vegetation monitoring. And all these generally fit together as far as giving the user a better understanding of their land and the potential of that land. Is that land suitable habitat for wildlife? Is it, can it be sustainably farmed? That kind of thing. So one of the really kind of bigger things that we were working on during my time with the Land PKS project was something called land capability classification. So this is actually something that was designed by the United States Department of Agriculture after the Dust Bowl in the 1920s as a way to, I guess, more sustainably use the land through more informed land use planning and management. So you collect, and we'll go through this, you collect different data about your land, about the soil, about the slope, different things like that. And based on that, it breaks up land into 8 very basic categories. This is not a complicated system, but it ranges from class 1, which is prime agricultural land, to class 8, which is land that will not be able to sustain agriculture for any amount of time and would be better if used for something else. Recreation, wildlife habitat, forests. And this is really important to know, particularly in places that are, have not been farmed very much. You go to a new piece of land, you want to know what's the best use of this land. It's not going to be very good for the environment if you just clear a piece of land, try to farm it, and it doesn't have the right potential. It can't really be farmed sustainably. So you farm it for 2 years and then have to move on because your yields decline significantly. So this is how this can really help you decide where you farm and where you don't farm in a way that's, informed by data and informed by science. And all of this is actually text is in the app as well. So basically classes 1 through 4 are classes of land that are suitable for agriculture. They might require some types of management. So for example, a class 4, you might have to choose some specific crops that are suitable to that land, or you might have to manage it in a certain way, either be through soil conservation or water conservation management. For class 1 is basically, great, go ahead, farm the land. And then class 5 through 8 is land that really shouldn't be farmed and instead should be used for something else, whether that be as rangeland for livestock or as conservation land for wildlife. So basically how the land capability classification works is you input your data. These are the different, in the middle box here, these are the different fields that you input data on. So what's the soil texture? What's the surface stoniness? What's the slope? And these are all designed to be collected without any technical scientific instruments. And we want this app to be something people can use who can't afford to buy, really expensive equipment, or even really any equipment besides what a farmer would normally have on them in the first place. Once you get that, that will rank each of these. So you get a score for each of these different categories. And then your final land capability class is based on, what's the most limiting factor. So you could get really good scores for agriculture on all of these, except the slope. Let's say you're on a slope that's like this. So regardless of how good the soil is, it's hard to, farm on a 50% slope. That's not going to be so sustainable. So really it looks at that kind of thing. So which of these factors is going to limit the agricultural potential of the land? Here's just some pictures. These are both trainings in Tanzania that I did. So you can see part of the app is actually digging a hole and collecting soil samples from different depths. This is important to see what the soil texture is. Soil texture is one of the most important properties of the soil. So that basically means, is it a sand, is it a clay, or is it a silt? And different varieties or combinations of those three. And that is really important for root growth, as well as water. So can the soil hold water? Can the water infiltrate into the soil, or does it just run off? How erodible is the soil? Things like that. You can even see in the example on the left here, there's different depths and the soil actually changes color, which has meaning as well as far as you go deeper down, which is why we do a whole soil profile, because you want to know, in the root and kind of the part of the soil where roots would be, what does the soil look like? These folks in this training, a lot of them were village farmers and several of them were land use planners from the national office in Tanzania as well. And on the right, this is an agricultural extension agent who I worked with for a few days in Tanzania. You can see she has some soil in her hand. She's currently making a ball, which is part of how you determine the soil texture, which we'll go over. And she's using the phone. And she really thought this was a powerful tool because as the agricultural extension agent, she has basically no resources. She has no access to labs, no access to experts, and she's the one who's supposed to advise these farmers about what they should be growing. So being able to dig a soil pit and look at the soil is incredibly helpful for her because she has been trained on soils. And she has been trained on what kind of plants grow well in what kind of soils and what kind of conservation practices you should practice on what soils. But she doesn't have any tools to actually look at the soil. So this is a really valuable tool for, you know, these rural agricultural extension agents that don't have a lot of resources available to them. Okay, so I know last time the videos were not working so well, so I'm going to actually try to do the videos. Don't relaunch now. Try to do the videos just in YouTube and see how this works. So this is the first video. This is from the same training that we did in New Mexico. This is Sean. He is one of the soil scientists on our Land PKS team, and he's kind of walking through how you actually should prepare your soil sample and then how you hand texture it. This is a bit of an informal video, so we're joking around a bit, so just ignore that, but it should kind of walk you through how to actually hand texture the soil.
Forms a ball very well. Then asks you if it forms a ribbon, and the answer is it does form a ribbon pretty well. And for people who are untrained, the ribboning part I think is the hardest thing. Now you told me that this should be with our non-dominant hand and accuracy. Yeah. So. So what I'm doing now is essentially pinching the soil with my thumb over my index finger. And I'm not getting a very long ribbon. What are the breaks, the questions that it's asking?
Less than 2.5, 2.5 to 5, and 5
So my ribbons, and this is something that is very difficult if you've not worked with soil before, but my ribbon comes out around 3 centimeters.
Is it gritty?
The next question essentially asks you if it's dominantly clay, silt, or sand. If it's gritty, smooth, or neither.
Not gritty or smooth?
And the easiest way to do this is to take a little bit in your palm, super hydrate it, where it's saturated with water, and you roll it around with your non-dominant finger to figure out if it's gritty.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop Sean there. But he's basically shown you, because I'm gonna demonstrate Land PKS just going through the app, but he's basically shown you in person how you actually go through and hand texture the soil. And the app will walk you through that. It's basically kind of a choose your own adventure. So based on the first question, it asks you a second question until you get to, hey, your texture is a sandy clay loam, and then it records that. And we'll go through that when we actually go through the app. All right, not too much. I don't want to spend too much more time. I want to get to the actual demonstration. So another module of the app is this land cover, which actually is being used for conservation purposes as well. Here's some examples of some of the projects. And it basically walks you through how to monitor vegetation. So that's obviously important if you're doing a vegetation restoration project. How is that going? If you're monitoring habitat degradation over time, certain wildlife species rely on certain types of plants. Maybe some rely on trees, others more on grasses. And this is really important, and this does help you monitor change over time. So how is that vegetation changing over time? Which is important both for looking at wildlife habitat suitability and also suitability for livestock. Are there the proper fodder species for your livestock on the land? Here's some photos from different trainings we've done on land cover. Just as with land info, the soils version, soils module, we've made this really something you can do without any technical equipment. You just need your phone, and you literally need your phone and a stick, and that is it. And using a phone and a stick, you look at what plants are growing at 5 different intervals on your stick. And you do 20 sticks per plot, basically, and it walks you through how to do that. And then it calculates the data for you. So let's say I drop my stick. I look right here on my stick, there should be a line, and I say, is there a tree? Is there a shrub, plant base? And you just click, click, click. And it makes it really easy to collect kind of a large amount of data in a short period of time, particularly if you become used to the app and you're also fairly familiar with the plant types that are around. So here's some of the data that you get. So total cover, plant cover versus bare ground, foliar cover, so that's leaves, herbaceous litter, woody litter, and then of the plant cover, what types of plants do you have? So based on this, you would say the dominant plant type in this plot was grass, perennial grass. And then canopy height is also important. So particularly when it comes to birds, certain birds require certain heights of trees or certain heights of plants. So recording this is also helpful to know habitat suitability for different species of wildlife. So that's land cover. You can go on the Land PCAST website and learn a bit more about that one. Just for the sake of time, we don't have time to cover it today. I do want to show one other brief little video. This is from Dr. David Kimiti. He's a collaborator with us on this project, and he's I think his title is the head researcher at Lewa Wildlife Conservation, which is in Kenya. They're one of the few locations around Kenya that are still conserving rhino. They do have rhino, so he has rhino in the background. And he actually uses both the soils piece and the vegetation piece of Land PCAST to monitor their wildlife conservancy. So this is a really good example of how it's being used in real life. So I do have it's going to launch in an hour. Okay, I do have a very short video. Let me.
We use Land PCAST on the conservancy primarily to understand the effects of soils, climate, and topography have on the vegetation distribution. We need to do this so that we can understand how ecological sites will require different management.
Great. Yeah, just a very, very short video from him there. Okay, so that's it for part 1 of the lecture. Part 2, please go to that when you're done. When you're done with both parts, as I said, go to Blackboard and do the participation for the day. And then for Monday, we're going to start covering some of the major U.S. environmental acts in a bit more detail. So on Monday, we're going to be looking at the U.S. Endangered Species Act. And then on next Wednesday, we're going to be looking at water conservation and the Clean Water Act. And I've also actually managed to arrange, hopefully, if everything technology works out, kind of a guest speaker who is a water policy analyst here in the US. So he's going to speak some about his job and what he does as a water policy analyst in the western half of the United States. So with that, thank you. And please go over to part 2 of today's lecture video.